Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello friends, I hope that you've been well. As some of you might know, I went on a trip to Japan last year, and I do have some vlogs and a Japan haul up on the channel if you haven't watched them yet. But the main event of today's video is I'm going to be reviewing another art supply that I bought when I was there. Last month, I had reviewed the Ghibli/Miyazaki art kit that I bought when I went to the Ghibli Museum. I highly recommend checking out the museum, and if you haven't watched the art supply review yet on the kit, I'll have it linked for you to watch back. It was really fun to work on. But I also picked up art supplies from the amazing Sakaido, which is famous for having multiple floors of incredible art supplies. And something that I picked up was these manga screen tones, which I have never used before. So I'm really excited to be able to show you guys my first impressions of them. So these are the ones that I picked up. Again, I'd never used them before, so I tried to be mindful of not going overboard, but it was really hard to control myself and not buy every single pattern that was available there. And for those of you who aren't familiar, manga screentones are basically transparent film that was traditionally used for creating manga panels for Japanese comics, essentially. And I think a lot of people nowadays have switched to digital, but this was something that used to be done all traditionally. Personally, I have no intentions of creating any manga or comics anytime soon, but when I was deciding on what direction I wanted to take the drawing for today's video, I of course had to turn to my original character Momo, who is a Japanese schoolgirl girl gang character, essentially. I've drawn her on the channel many times before, and she of course just felt very fitting for an art supply that is from Japan. As you would have seen with the examples that I showed earlier, manga screen tones were typically used in black and white form. The manga screen tones themselves come in like grayscale black and white, and then the mangakas would work with traditional inks just in black on white kind of board or paper. For my purposes, I thought, since I am an artist who absolutely loves working with color, I'm basically allergic to working in black and white. So I thought, why not add in some color first and then use the manga screen tones on top, since they are transparent, and just see how they interact with each other, because this is not a method that I've really seen before. And so yeah, with this sketchbook, I tend to like to use like leftover watercolors that's like left on the palette and just do big washes of them on the paper so that I'm not wasting the paints, but also it creates like a nice backdrop for future illustrations. So of course I decided to go with this pink wash page here, since the character Momo has pink hair and just, I think, color palette wise really suits the character. And yeah, after I did the sketch with my coal erase color pencil, I went ahead and used black fine liners for the line art, and this felt really nostalgic. It's not a process or method that I've done in quite a while, since I typically use mostly paints now. But yeah, before we get into the painting, I just want to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. I'm sure that many of you are fellow artists yourselves, and I think the really big highlight for Squarespace is being able to have a portfolio for all of your best work. And so for me, I have a various different series of illustrations that I like to kind of categorize together. In this case, I have a series where I did my monthly favorites for 2022 and 2023. And what is amazing is that you can actually edit the photos directly on Squarespace, which makes it so much more streamlined so that you can present your work in the most consistent and professional way as possible, which is important for me because I actually have to photograph my work as opposed to a digital artist, which you can just upload the file to. So if you're interested in launching your own website, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/imawonder for 10% off your first website or domain. So after I finish doing the line art, I'm going to be using my custom paintbrushes that I did in collaboration with Craftimo, which, by the way, at the time of this recording, there is 15 left for purchase, so get them while you can. And as you saw, I just had the water in my little plastic bottle that I used to reactivate this old watercolor that was sitting on my palette and start going in and painting the character. I wanted to keep this really loose and fun because I feel like with the Zodiac illustration series, I've been putting a lot of effort into rendering and making that really polished. So for this purpose, I wanted to try and keep it a lot more casual, especially since this is a sketchbook. So I'm basically just kind of very quickly blocking in all of the warm colors first. So I started out with the pink. I did a little bit of blush on her face, and then I'm going in with all of the reds. As I mentioned before, this character is typically drawn in a Japanese school uniform because that was where the inspiration originally drew from. But I felt like, it was getting a little bit repetitive to have her in the same outfit twice on this page. So I decided to go in kind of a Western route for the bottom illustration and put her in like a Letterman jacket, which I thought was a fun kind of contrast to the Japanese school uniform, and also helped balance out the blue that is so dominant on the top half. And then with the Letterman jacket, I was able to use a more dominant red for that portion. And then for the part where she's kind of leaping here for the full body part, I thought I wanted to break up all of the pink, especially because I want her pink hair to stand out a little better. So I painted a little panel of blue, which I'm going to use the Sky manga screen tone on top of. And just to add a little bit of more texture, I went in with some colored pencils just in like little random spots here and there. So after I finished painting and kind of coloring everything, I am going to be actually using the manga screen tones. So you'll need scissors, an X-Acto knife, and the tweezers. Tweezers is kind of optional, but it'll come in handy for the really detailed parts. So as you can see, the manga screen tone is transparent, and I'm just lining it up here to see where I want to cut out the panel. And I use my color pencil here just to very lightly trace the part that I need to cut. And thankfully, it is actually very easy to draw on top of. It's like a more matte film. And then at first, I didn't really know how tacky or how strong the adhesive was going to be on this sheet. So I was very careful about like trying to line it up exactly right and like prevent bubbles. But then I very quickly realized that the adhesive is actually very, very light. So it's super easy to just like peel and reposition it and get it exactly where you want it to be. And then I went ahead and used a bone folder to try and like get rid of any bubbles and make sure it's like really, really stuck to the paper, since I realized that the tackiness was so minimal. You could definitely use like a credit card or something like that to do this. You don't have to use a bone folder, but I really want to make sure that it was lying really, really flat and flush to the page. And then the scary part was actually cutting out the panels here. So I decided to start off with a part that was easy and less stakes. So just like this straight line on the edge there, just to get a feel for how much pressure I needed to use. Thankfully, the manga screen tones are very, very thin, so they cut fairly easily. But yeah, it is a very tricky thing to navigate. Using an X-Acto knife for these kind of more organic shapes. And I find it really challenging to see where I've cut. But yeah, the thing I would highly recommend if you're using manga screen tones is make sure that you're using a paper that is on the thicker side, of course, so that you're not cutting all the way through to the other side. But like I said, the manga screen tones are very thin, so you don't have to use a ton of pressure. And the paper that I'm using is like a mixed media watercolor paper. So it held up really, really well with this X-Acto knife. And then the moment of truth of actually peeling back everything that we cut out here using the tweezers. And of course, everything started off pretty good. And I was so focused on the shot that I didn't realize that I was totally ripping into the section that I did not want to actually be peeling off. But you can see here, I actually just push it back with my finger and it's honestly pretty seamless. Like you can't really tell that I made that error. And again, I think because it's a pattern and also it's so thin, yeah, like I don't think you can really tell. And again, it's just in my sketchbook. It's not that really big of a deal that I made that little error. But yeah, from there, I ended up being a lot more careful about the peeling. And you can see it sometimes kind of comes off in sections. And then I end up having to go back into certain areas or go into like, especially the really fine kind of detailed areas. But yeah, basically the lesson learned is like really pay attention to what is lifting up and be really slow and patient with it. As I mentioned earlier, the tackiness of the adhesive is quite light, so that does mean that you can reposition the screen tones pretty easily, but I did find that it left a tiny little bit of a residue on the illustration, so definitely make sure that your illustration is basically done before you start doing the screen tones. And then I hate having like all these additional scraps. It just feels like such a waste, so I thought why not try and reuse some of these kind of odd shapes for other parts of the illustration. And yeah, it totally works. You just have to really make sure you're kind of pressing the screen tone back onto the page, because again, the tackiness is on the lighter side, but since this is just going to live in my sketchbook, it's not going to get a lot of friction or people touching it. But yeah, I'm glad that I made sure to like preserve the scraps just on like the film so that I could continue using bits and bobs of it for little parts of the illustration here. And of course, because these manga screen tones are grayscale, it does create a different effect when you're using them on top of the colored portions here, as opposed to if I were to actually paint them on. So it does desaturate the areas and kind of gray them out, but I'm typically just using them in areas that I want to create a shadow, and it has that little halftone effect. So it's pretty fun. It's not something that I would do all the time, of course, but it just like creates another kind of texture and pattern. And then moving on to the bottom illustration here, I decided I wanted to actually use the screen tones to create some shadows on the character, and also for the baseball bat for, again, a different kind of texture and look so that it separates the item from the rest of the character. So like I did earlier, I traced out the shape that I wanted to cut out and then stuck it directly on to the paper there, use the bone folder to really make it stick, and use the X-Acto knife to cut out all of the little areas. And while using the X-Acto knife to cut around all of the really small organic detailed areas is a little bit challenging, I think knowing that this was just a low stakes kind of fun thing in my sketchbook helped me feel less pressure about it. But I am trying to be better about not being overly precious about my art supplies. I did try my best to not cut out too large of excessive shapes for what I needed, because I just hate wasting art supplies if I can help it. But yeah, these are honestly really fun. I'm glad that I picked them up when I was in Japan. I am definitely going to consider getting more in the future, depending on how often I end up using these. And like I said earlier, I don't intend to make a manga myself, so I do believe I will just continue to use them really casually in my sketchbook. But yeah, it is interesting to use the manga screen tones like on top of all of the color, because like I said earlier, it sort of desaturates the area. And if you can't tell, I'm a big lover of very bright bold colors. So I think the next time I use these, I might actually go ahead and commit to a more traditional approach to it by using a grayscale / black and white color palette. Even though it's out of my wheelhouse or like out of my nature typically, I do think that these screen tones will probably look better and be like more highlighted in a traditional approach to using them. Obviously, I use them pretty sparingly in this spread just because I wanted to really highlight all of the colors that I'd used in it. But I do think the sky element was especially fun for this particular sketchbook spread. I do believe that you can buy these manga screen tones in other places other than Japan, but I do think that they're fairly hard to come by. So I do recommend picking them up if you're interested in just another fun medium to explore. I don't remember what each sheet cost just because I purchased them so long ago, but definitely going to be the most cost effective while you're in Japan. And yeah, I definitely have hopes to go to Japan again one day, so I'll probably pick up more when I'm back. And another little thing that I wanted to try was using the fine liners directly on top of the manga screen tones, and can confirm that it worked just fine. And yeah, these are the kind of like leftover scraps. So you can see I was like very mindful of trying to use as much of it as possible. And on that note, this is the final result. Using these manga screen tones was very fun, super straightforward to use. And let me know if you want to see me work with them again, but maybe in an actual black and white manner this time. And maybe I'll try my hand at actually creating a comic panel for the purpose of using these screen tones. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope that you have an amazing day or evening wherever you're at, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!